So something major has just happened that we were not expecting. This is actually good news for the American people, but this is also good news for people in Israel and in Gaza and in Ukraine. So a lot of stuff is happening right now. I want to address what's going on because, again, we are starting to see movement, which means that things are getting closer. So again, I will wrap this up. I'll explain exactly what's happening. All I ask is one thing. It takes 2 seconds. Go ahead, hit that like button if you enjoy these daily updates. And now, let's begin. So over the past week, many things have happened. We have seen more attacks from Israel into Gaza, trying to get Hamas out of hiding. We've seen more push from President Zelensky from Ukraine, trying to get additional funding for Ukraine. We've heard additional talks and discussions regarding what's happening in China, how China is potentially lining up to attack the American people here on U.S. soil. But something happened earlier on today that now is progressing. What happened on earlier today was we passed the NDAA. This is the National Defense Authorization Act for $866 billion. That was a big win for the American people. But what's following that is even bigger. Here's what's going on. I want to show you this. It says Congress departs without a deal on Ukraine aid and border security, but the Senate will work next week. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to play a clip from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, but what he talks about is very interesting because he is saying that he is requiring the Senate to come back next week, which they are supposed to have next week off. So even though the House of Representatives departed today, the Senate is going to take the next 3 days off. They will come back on Monday and start working on a deal that includes additional funding for Ukraine, but also border security. One of the things that we've discussed over the past few weeks is border security, because one of the things that Democratic governors have been saying, for example, in New York and in Illinois, they are saying that their states, their cities are being overrun, and we have to put a stop to it. But how far does that go? Well, that's where we're going to find out, because over the next week, we are supposed to have this bill, the supplemental bill, and I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, you can see that one right here. But this is the fact sheet. Now, look at the date. This is from October 20th, 2023. That's important to note because that was about 2 weeks after Hamas attacked Israel and took over 200 hostages. So this is something that we'll go over in just a moment. I'll show you what's being included into it and what they're going to discuss. But first, let's listen to what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say just earlier on today.
Over the last few days, negotiations on a path forward to getting national security supplemental done have made good progress. As I've said, if we believe something is important and urgent, we should stay and get the job done. That is certainly the case with the supplemental. It is important, it is urgent.
I just want to point out the supplemental is this, okay? This is the supplemental. This is the National Security Supplemental from Congress. This is going to pass an additional $100 billion for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Gaza. So that's what he's talking about when he refers to the supplemental. Let's keep watching.
I spoke with Leader McConnell this morning about the plan for next week and making sure the Senate continues to do our work. So, for the information of all senators, after we finish today, the Senate will return on Monday. That will give negotiators from the White House, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, a time to work through the weekend in an effort to reach a framework agreement. It will then take some time to turn that framework into text. To prevent unnecessary delays, I intend to move to reconsider the shell for the supplemental as a vehicle to move an agreement forward.
So I want to show you this. I want to show you what is being included into this supplemental, because there's probably a lot of people here that are wondering, well, What are we going to negotiate? What is being included in this $100 billion package? Well, here it is. It says, to advance our critical national security interests, the Biden-Harris administration is calling on Congress to provide additional national security resources that will, first, is support Israel's defense against terrorism. You can see strengthen Israel's defense from vicious terrorist attacks and bolster the Israeli Defense Force, or the IDF. Ensure Israel's air and missile defense systems readiness. Replenish DoD stocks, which is a big one. Strengthen Israel's military, enhance U.S. Embassy security. That's also a big one as well, because we saw just last week there was an embassy that was hit. I believe it was hit by 4 different missiles. So again, that's a big one. We need to secure our embassies. Also defend Ukraine against Russian aggression. It's additional weapons and equipment to help Ukraine succeed on the battlefield and protect its people against Russian attacks. Continued military intelligence and other defense support. Critical economic and civilian security assistance. Support for Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war. And nuclear radiological crisis management. Also goes on for life-saving humanitarian assistance. Provide life-saving humanitarian assistance and support for innocent civilians devastated by Putin's unjust war in Ukraine, Hamas's attack on Israel, and the numerous other natural and man-made crises around the world. Also, strengthen the Indo-Pacific. Okay, so security assistance for capacity building to address ongoing and emerging threats. The United States Submarine Industrial Base and ACUS. And then ensure military readiness, provide alternatives to coercive PRC financing in developing countries, and it goes on, strengthening border security and enforcement, okay, all these different things. And I want to point out one thing. This was Biden's plan, strengthening border security and enforcement. This is not the Republican plan, okay? So he wants to additional 1,300 Border Patrol agents, funding to deploy over 100 cutting-edge inspection machines, additional 1,000 law enforcement personnel and investigative capabilities, 1,600 additional asylum officers, 375 new immigration judge teams, additional grants to local governments and nonprofits, critical border management activities, expansion of lawful pathways, support for eligible arrivals, funding to conduct robust child labor investigations and enforcement, and reimbursement to the Department of Defense for its support. That's Biden's plan. Okay, that's not the Republican plan. Okay, but the big news out recently is that they think a deal's getting close. It's getting close. That's what they're saying. For example, Senator Sinema believes that we can reach a deal. We can see the deal on Ukraine border as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He cuts the recess down to just 1 week. But let's keep listening to what he has to say as well.
The plan is for the Senate to act as soon as we are ready to move forward on the supplemental. Members need to be here next week. We have to get this done. Our Republican colleagues who have said action on the border is so urgent should have no problem with continuing to work next week. We hope to come to an agreement, but no matter what, members should be aware that we will vote on a supplemental proposal next week. Mr. President, it's not easy to reach an agreement on something this complicated. This might be one of the most difficult things we have ever had to work through, but we all know that so much hangs on our success.
Now, one thing I want to touch on there. So he is saying that it's going to be very difficult to reach an agreement. Right now, there's tensions that are very high across the world, not just in the United States, regarding what's happening between Israel and Hamas, because it's the people of Gaza that are struggling. We're seeing almost 20,000 people, losing their life because of what is happening. That is just in Gaza. Doesn't include the amount of people in Israel that lost their lives when Hamas attacked Israel back on October 7th. Doesn't include them. Okay? So what he's saying is that they're going to vote on this supplemental bill. And it's going to be what President Biden wants. That's what they're going to vote on next week. But at the same time, They are hoping that Republicans are willing to come to the negotiation table, negotiate this, and attempt to pass a bill that includes the supplemental funding for Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and other crises around the world, but in addition to border security. They want a bipartisan bill. And keep this in mind. Just because it passes or may pass in the Senate does not mean the House of Representatives runs back to vote on this. If it's a bipartisan bill, yes, they will. If it's not, we are not going to see the House of Representatives come back into session right before Christmas. That's not going to happen. They will wait. They'll wait until they come back in January, and by that time, there could be other issues that we are going to face. So, one thing I can tell you, these negotiations are going to happen. It is actually potentially big news because we haven't seen a lot of bipartisan negotiations regarding border security. So that's the big one. How far is this going to go? Is it actually going to shore up our borders, make sure we are more secure, not just on border towns and border states, but in places like New York, okay, in Illinois, in other places that are not next to our southern border? Well, we're going to find out, but as we get more information, I promise I'll fill you in on all the latest news and updates, but that is what we know as of right now. So again, thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.